Hello friends, and welcome back to the Halloween of Craft! I'm back with another video for you guys, and as I'm sure you can tell from the background, I am in my new place, and I now have a dedicated crafting room. Very excited about this. However, I'm kind of noticing that I've got a bit of a sound issue. I got a bit of an echo in here, so moving forward I might need to pick up some of those soundproof foam pads for the walls, but for now I hope you'll just bear with the echo. But I am so excited for all of the new projects that I get to make in this dedicated crafting space. I'm really looking forward to it, and especially after a very hectic and stressful move and a very chaotic and stressful time at my day job, I'm really looking forward to just sitting down and banging out a nice short sweet video for you guys. So I was a Wave 1 backer of the Reaper Bones 5 Kickstarter, and I received my package a couple of weeks before my move, and it didn't feel right to kind of just unbox them all so that I could rebox them and bring them into my new condo. So I patiently waited, but now that I'm in here, I am very excited to dig into this box and just paint something that gets me excited. So I took a page out of Brent's book from Goobertown Hobbies, and I just sat myself down in front of this box of minis and started rifling through it until I could find something that really just gave me that genuine moment of joy and excitement to unpack this thing, put it together, and start slapping some paint on it. And if I was a good YouTuber, I probably would have pointed the camera at myself and taken some B-roll footage of that magical moment, but I didn't think to do that, so I'll just have to walk you through it. So I was pretty certain that I was going to be painting one of the large dragon minis from the Bones 5 Kickstarter because they're one of the main reasons I backed the campaign. I really love that their anatomy is true to the lore of the 5e dragons, and that you can tell which dragon is which before you even put any color on them. They have some distinct differences in the shape of their horns and their bodies, etc. So that got me really excited, but I actually found something else to paint today, and I think it's a little bit more thematic. Maybe I just got the Halloween vibes in the air that kind of drove me in this direction, but as soon as I opened the box, I didn't have to dig very far before I found the Overgourd mini, and he's just wonderful, so I couldn't resist. I had to bust him out and paint him, and I think it worked out pretty well because he's a good size for a nice little short, contained first project in the new space. So I set up all my camera equipment and lights, and I got to building. The first thing I did off camera was I took all of the pieces of my Overgourd and I thoroughly washed and dried them just to make sure that there was no mold release agent left on it. I did not want that to muck up the paint job later on. Then I just took all of the pieces and assembled them together using super glue and drops of accelerant to speed up the process. After that, I glued him to a 2-inch plastic base, also from Reaper. The model itself has a decent base on it already, with the rotting pumpkins kind of coming together to make a substructure for it, but I wanted to be able to add a little bit more like ground texture and stuff, and I found the 2-inch base is just more reliable, more stable. Once he was secure, I took out this 3D modeling gel to add some texture and depth to the base. I just used an old crappy brush to slap this onto the black base, and I sculpted a bit to make the transition from the base to the mini a little more natural. Now the big downside of this paste is that it takes quite a while to dry completely. So I used this opportunity to clean up some of the mold lines and fill the gaps with green stuff. Now, I can never correctly guess the amount of green stuff I'm gonna need, and I tend to lean on the heavier side, like I make too much. So I kind of took some of that extra green stuff at the end, rolled it into little sausages, and pressed those onto the back, kind of draping them over the rocks to create a couple extra roots. Just didn't want to waste it. Once that's all dry, I primed the mini black. For this, I just used the Vallejo black airbrush primer, but I brushed it on with a regular brush. I find that it clogs my airbrush. I just prefer to do it this way. If you do it this way as well, just make sure that you're kind of cognizant of not putting too much. You don't want it to pool, you don't want to clog those details. You can totally do that with a brush, just as long as you're thinking about it while you do it. Once that was dry, now is when I bust out the airbrush and I use it to zenithal highlight him. I start with Reaper Paint's Wolf Gray from a 45-degree angle, just adding highlights to the mini. And once that's dry, I follow that up with some white ink straight out of the pot, and I spray that mostly from above. While I was spraying him with the airbrush, I realized that I desperately needed a handle for him, or else I was just gonna cramp my hand and it would be impossible to get a good result. So I took an old medicine bottle and I hot glued him to the top. For all of the vines, I wanted to transition from purple toned shadows to yellow toned highlights. This to get a bit more contrast. It'll help the brights look brighter and the darks look darker, but obviously there's going to be green tones in the middle to kind of make that transition together. So I'm going to create a blend from Night Sky Indigo to Ancient Oak to Naga Green. And then for the ground and pumpkins, I'm going to start with Muddy Brown and Ruddy Flesh as a base coat, and then saturate those with Burnt Orange and Lantern Yellow. I also put some Candlelight Yellow and Golden Glow on my palette just in case I need to go brighter, but I don't think the Golden Glow actually ever made it into the highlights of the pumpkin. So I just put all these colors out on my wet palette, and then I thin them down with water. Now, I haven't painted anything since Maldracar, so I was feeling a little bit rusty at this point, and I wanted to kind of ease myself into it. I know that's quite a long time since painting, but like I said, I have been quite busy, a lot going on at the start. So anyway, I wanted to ease myself in, so I figured I'd start on the base in non-committing way, less pressure, and if I mess it up, it's just the base and I can always go back. So I start on the base, and I base coat everything with my browns. And then I start wet blending in some of my burnt orange from the top. I let that dry, and then I come back and repeat the same process to get a bit more of a thicker coat. Once I'm happy with the coverage of that, I start working my way up into brighter oranges to build up these highlights. While I give those highlights some time to dry, I figure I can keep my hands busy and base coat these vines. I mix together the Ancient Oak with my Night Sky Indigo to create a really deep purple, and then I paint that purple into all of the shadowy areas on the vines. While that is still wet, I transition to some Ancient Oak on its own, and then wet blend that out of the shadows towards the brighter areas. Now that my pumpkins are dry, I'll repeat those steps onto the vines of my base pumpkins. This includes switching to a finer brush and painting all of the tiny vines that are gripping the base pumpkins. This step really adds a ton of detail to the base. Now let's pump that up even more. I can start mixing in some Naga Green and working towards those yellow toned green highlighted areas of the vines. I'm using thin coats and repeating this step multiple times, making the overall coverage smaller and smaller each time to create a focused highlight area. Once I'm happy with the vines, I pour out some more Ruddy Flesh, and then using very thin coats, I base coat all of the Overgourd's pumpkin faces. With that done, I put on my Gnome Tinkerer goggles and focus on building up the highlights on these pumpkin faces with my orange tones. Focusing my highlights around the eyes and faces and on top of the pumpkins. Once I have a good highlight built up on the burnt orange, I start mixing in more towards the Candlelight Yellow. Until eventually, I'm just using straight Candlelight Yellow on the brightest areas, and at this point, I go back and I add it to the tops of my base pumpkins as well, just to make sure things are consistent. And now it's oil wash time, baby. If you've been watching my other videos, it should be no surprise to you that I have fallen down the oil wash rabbit hole, or I've climbed onto the oil wash bandwagon, however you want to say it. They work great, and I want to keep using them, so I'm going to use it here as well. I start by mixing black and brown oil paints with white spirits in a separate container, and mix that down to a very thin consistency. And once I'm happy with the way that it's thinned down, I will take that and use it on all of the orange surfaces. After I'm done that, I mix some green oil paints into that already existing wash, and then using my now dark brown, green, black wash, I will use that on all of the vines. After the whole thing is coated, I will take some makeup sponges and use them to remove the oil wash from the highlight areas so that it doesn't muddy them down too much, and I will also use those makeup sponges to remove the oil wash from the eye sockets and the mouths of the jack-o'-lanterns, because I want those areas to be bright, and if I can remove the oil wash from there before it dries, it'll just make my life easier moving on. Here's what it looks like when it's all dry. It really gives a beautiful amount of definition to all the recesses without crushing all that work we did on the highlights. As a side note, while I was doing that, I noticed that the wash that dripped down onto the base dripped off and onto my handle and then kind of got underneath the hot glue and severed the connection. So my overgourd actually came off of my makeshift handle. Never really experienced that before, but just something to keep top of mind. Apparently white spirits and hot glue don't play nice together, so interesting. Now I'm gonna paint this guy's toothy maw. For the colors, I'm using bone shadow into aged bone into leather white. This has been my go-to bone teeth recipe for a little while now. I really like how it gives it a nice gritty look without leaning too much into the yellow tones. And after I'm finished with the teeth, it's time to make all of these pumpkin faces really pop. So the plan here is to make all of the smaller faces look like classic jack-o'-lanterns with the kind of orange glow coming out of them. But for the main face, I really want to draw a lot of attention to it. It's already situated central on the piece, so your eye's gonna kind of go there naturally, but I feel like I can add a lot of extra contrast there with colors to really pull your eye there and focus it. So I want to do a couple things. I want to make it purple to contrast all of the yellow and orange tones that we've been using everywhere else, and I also want to make it very bright, almost like it's a light source, and give it like a dark pupil, so you're kind of, it is the single biggest point of contrast, and so you will be unable to look anywhere else first. Anyway, before we do that, to start these light sources, it'll make our lives a lot easier if we start by base coating them with a pure white to go over top of, instead of kind of the mix of everything that has kind of gotten in there throughout the painting process so far. So I will just use some pure white to get a solid base coat on the main eye and all of the cuts on all of the faces. I'm not too worried if the white spills out over onto the edges, because this will all get covered up when we go back and paint the colors of the OSL. Here's what it looks like after the first coat. It's not bad, but I want it to be a little thicker, so I'll go back and add a second coat. Okay, so now that that's ready, I'm gonna start with the jack-o'-lantern faces. For these, I'm going to use a combination of sunrise orange, candlelight yellow, and golden glow. I'll start by glazing in a watered down version of the sunrise orange into all the cuts on the faces. Once that's dry, I'll take candlelight yellow and paint that into the center areas of the openings. Now, using the golden glow, I will edge highlight all of the perimeters of the faces. This really helps them all pop out. After finishing the faces, I want to use those same colors, with the exception of the golden glow because it's a bit too bright, to add OSL effects around the faces to help sell the effect that they are emitting light. I look at the faces and take note of the directions they're facing, and I basically glaze in some light from the faces on any areas that a jack-o'-lantern face would be looking at, or any area that is very close to a face. This helps add a lot of depth to the vine areas specifically where that kind of overlap happens. Really happy with how that's turning out. Okay, now it's time for the most important step of this whole paint job, the main focal point, the big eye. For this, I'm going to use 3 purples. They are Styx Purple, Wild Violet, and Spectral White. I'll start by painting a thinned version of the Styx Purple onto all the fleshy areas behind and beside the eye. Then I take the Spectral Glow and I coat the whole eye with that. From here, I go back and forth with my light and dark purples to glaze in a transition from as bright as possible in the middle of the eye to a darker, more saturated purple at the edges. This will help sell that glow effect and also help draw your eye to the middle. Once I'm happy with that, I will go back and add my mid-tone purple and add some highlights to the ripples in the flesh behind the eye. Now, using a similar effect to how I painted the glow effect from my other jack-o'-lantern heads, I will add a purple glow effect coming from the main eye. I don't want to overdo this, and I definitely don't want the purple to bend around any corners and look unnatural. This light should be focused on the area immediately around the main eye, and I'll use my brighter purple to kind of call out the details. After finishing that, I'll mix some pure white with some spectral white and then glaze that onto the middle to make it even brighter. I also go back here and add some purple highlights and shadows to the teeth and the bottom lip, because I realized that they would also be catching some light from this eye as it pokes out in the front. Now my plan here from the beginning was to paint a nice dragon-esque eye on this thing and give it that slit down the middle, very iconic look. But at this point I was kind of reconsidering. I got a little bit of cold feet on that because I was so happy with how the transitions from, you know, light to dark turned out in this kind of glow effect. I was really apprehensive about putting like a black slit in the middle and fucking it all up. So I kind of reconsidered, but then I decided, no, I gotta stick to my guns. I said I was gonna do this. We're painting a black slit for better or worse, and I charged forward. So I poured out some coal black onto my palette, and I took a very fine brush. I flipped the mini upside down in my hand and held it up against my wrist for extra stability, and then using my small brush and a very small amount of coal black, I dragged a line towards myself, a very, very fine line, as fine as I could do, in the middle of the eye, or at least in the direction that I wanted the eye to be looking. And then once that line was down, I started using very, very small, measured, controlled brush strokes to try and thicken it until it was wide enough that I was happy with it. After I was happy with the shape of the pupil, I added the finishing touch to any eye with some dramatic white dots to the top right and bottom left. And then I sat there and enjoyed the rest of my beer while admiring my hard work. As one final touch, I attached some dead grass tufts to the open areas of the base, and then I drowned them in some Agrax Earthshade to darken them up even more. And then I called it a day on this bad boy. Take a look at the final result. Anyway, that's all there is to this paint job, friends. I hope you enjoyed me painting this Overgourd. I know I really had a good time doing it, and I hope you could get something out of it for yourself. If you enjoyed this video, I have plenty of other crafting and painting videos and tutorials that you can check out while you wait for the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and happy Halloween. I will see you guys soon. Take care. Now it's oil time, baby. No, oil wash time. Oil wash time. Oil time is something different.